Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Today is an exciting day. It's moving day.
This is the day we can finally release our squirrels back into the wild.
In case you missed our first video on squirrel rehabbing, then I encourage you to go watch that video first. It goes into much greater detail about how we got into rehabilitating squirrels and the process we used.
There'll be a link in the description to that video below.
Or you can click on the card right here. Watch that video first. Also, this video will be part 2 on our ongoing series about taxonomy.
Boring.
Yes, it can be a little bit boring, but we're going to sprinkle in some squirrel cuteness to make it a little bit more tolerable.
So it's time to start doing the video. Let's roll that intro.
A couple of months have now passed since we picked up our first baby squirrels for rehabilitation. Quick note, all of these squirrels that we rehab had been initially found abandoned.
And our first video shows how these squirrels wouldn't have survived without the help of rehabilitation.
Since the beginning, they have grown from the artificial heat-dependent, milk-needing, cute little rodents that you see here to the full-grown squirrels that you see behind us. They have been completely weaned from the bottle, now eating nuts, water, and leafy greens.
You know, some of the salads we make to them would put Jason's deli to shame.
It's true. All of the milestones we just mentioned represent a majority of the achievements the squirrels need to demonstrate before being released back into the wild.
In the last few months, it was really cool to see the personalities between them and their differences.
Most of them had their wild instincts kick in pretty early, but there were a few, namely Leroy, who was super happy and laid back and continues to play with all of us.
And he would do it all day if we let him.
He always stays very active in his cage. Unlike Zeus, well, he was a little bit of a lounger. Even as kids, Leroy would have to put Zeus in his place. And as you can see here, as adults, some things never changed. And I have to be honest with you, watching them take a nut from your hand and then go to a different part of the cage and bury it under a blanket is probably the cutest thing you'll see all year.
And considering 2020, we could use all the cuteness we could get.
So now the tricky part, getting them from the inside cage to the outside enclosure. And there was nothing graceful about this part. We just did the best we could. Essentially, all we did was take a box, put some holes in it. We would hold it up to the critter cage after putting some nuts in it to entice them to jump in. And then once they did, I would just slide the lid down over the box and we were done. It sounded simple enough. It did take some time. But as you can see, it did work. Alright, now on for squirrel number 2, and all we did was repeat the process. And by the way, if you're interested in the critter keeper that we use, there will be a link in the description below for more information. I quickly realized that painting the deck and relocating the squirrels on the same day was not a good idea. So we had to go through the house and basically take the long way to the backyard where the squirrel enclosure is located. Once we got out to the squirrel enclosure, the hard part was over with. All we had to do was open the box and hope they jumped forward. Which they did, which is good for us, because we didn't have a contingency plan for the backwards jump. And I know what you're thinking already. Socks with Crocs.
So embarrassing.
The purpose of the outside enclosure is to provide a safe area where they can get used to the outside sights, sounds, smells of nature, even those of predators. And now a few days have gone by, and it's time to let them free. And this is classic Zeus, about to experience his first day of freedom, and he's laying on his back looking at me like I'm ruining his day. He has got to be the laziest squirrel ever. And here we are, after 2 months of weighing them, feeding them from syringes, cleaning their poop, giving them antibiotics when they needed. It's time to open the door and let them go. Truthfully, it was a little anticlimactic. I at least thought Leroy would bolt out of there. Turns out they were happy right where they were, in the squirrel hotel that we provided. But after a while, and with some bargaining with some edible food, it finally happened. That's one small step for a squirrel. I think I'll just use my claws and climb up the enclosure instead. Nevertheless, those are Leroy's first steps as a free squirrel. You go, Leroy. Zeus, on the other hand, didn't want to leave and actually stayed in there for the rest of the day. Even squirrels have millennials. And as you can tell by this incredibly awkward belly flop you're about to see, leaving the door open so the squirrels can come and go as they work on their speed and agility is super important. And don't even try like you don't want to see that again. Poor guy, there wasn't a tree limb within 15 feet of him. He'll learn. So they'll spend the next several days coming and going from the squirrel enclosure as they become used to their environment. And at some point, they'll become so comfortable outside the enclosure than inside. At that point, they will be officially rehabbed, and we will likely never see them again.
So sad.
And actually never seeing them again turned out to be not true. They came back on a regular basis. And you might be wondering how we were able to tell. Well, some of them actually had physical features that set them clearly apart. For example, one squirrel we called Crazy Legs had a section of his tail that never grew any hair. He looked like the Charlie Brown Christmas tree. He was always easy to spot. Here is a video of my daughter feeding Crazy Legs after he had been released, and you can see how comfortable he is with the family out there just moving all around. The squirrels were so comfortable with my wife, she could go up to them and feed them while they were in the trees. That was much harder to capture on camera though. This is just another example of a random moment. While my daughter and I were filming the video, that a squirrel came up and said, "Hey, you remember those nuts you used to give us? Do you have any more?" I like to think that our neighbors occasionally look out the window, see my wife and daughter approach the woods and seemingly summon squirrels out to feed them, and then subsequently think to themselves, "What the f-?" So that's our adventures in squirrel rehabbing. Early spring and midsummer are the busy season for rehabbing squirrels based on their mating patterns. So I'm sure it won't be long before we start getting more calls to come help more squirrels. If this is something you're interested in or just want some information, check out this book that has a lot of beginner information and basics about rehabilitating animals.
We'll put a link in the description below.
Now let's switch gears to taxonomy.
That's boring. You're boring everybody.
Yes, not the most exciting of topic, thanks Homer, but you're doing your kids a disservice by not exposing them to the terminology of taxonomy.
Taxonomy is what scientists use to help classify all living beings in the world, even squirrels.
Traditionally, the taxonomy consists of the kingdom, the phylum, the class, the order, the family, the genus, and the species. Often remembered by the acronym, King Philip came over for good spaghetti.
Or the way I like to remember it is keep ponds clean or frogs get sick.
Today we're going to focus on the first level of the taxonomy classification system, the kingdom.
Originally there were two kingdoms, plants and animals.
Over time, more kingdoms were added like eubacteria, archaebacteria, protists, and fungi. And while sounding boring, fungi can be pretty interesting.
Do you have any hobbies?
I collect spores, molds, and fungus.
Today we're going to focus on the eastern gray squirrel and which kingdom it is classified into.
The animal kingdom.
And of course, we're not talking about that animal kingdom at Disney World with that dope Yeti ride. Fun fact, the Yeti on Expedition to Everest is actually broken. It used to move around, but in order to fix it, Disney would have to remove sections of the roller coaster track. So instead of fixing it, they just added strobe lights to give it the effect of motion.
If that Yeti were real, he'd be in the animal kingdom too. The animal kingdom we're talking about is the largest and most diverse of all kingdoms.
It contains over 2 million different species, everything from singing gibbons to zebras to giraffes. And another fun fact, a giraffe's tongue is 18 inches long, about as long as your forearm.
And it's so long, it can even clean its nose with its tongue. And when I mean clean its nose, I mean soap. And don't forget about us humans. We're in the animal kingdom too.
Everything in the animal kingdom has to eat food to get their energy. And we may not be as savage as some of our animal kingdom counterparts, but us humans, like all animals, have to consume food to get energy. That makes us called heterotrophs. Plants, on the other hand, are called autotrophs.
Plants make their own food through a process called photosynthesis.
Additionally, all species in the animal kingdom are made up of many cells, and all animal cells have a nucleus but don't have a cell wall, unlike plant cells that do have a cell wall. So with that bit of knowledge, it makes perfect sense why our friendly little squirrel here, like you and me, would belong to the animal kingdom. Our next video on taxonomy will focus on the next level of classification beneath the kingdoms, called the phylum. So stay tuned.
Enjoy this footage of our squirrels playing, and we'll see you next time.